Rishi. I'm a consultant. I work in London for a company called LTS. So a little bit about myself. So actually, I might as well put it not present to you, and then that will. So just wait a second. Sorry. To be fair, there's nothing funny. The presenter notes, it shouldn't actually. There you go. So my name is Rishi. I work for a consultancy called LTS. So my background, I haven't actually come from a traditional kind of BI background. I'm a chartered accountant. Worked at Deloitte and did like tax accounting, and then moved into the kind of world of data and BI through Excel, Power Pivot, Power Query, that kind of thing, and VBA, and then getting into business intelligence. And you know, I do a lot of stuff with the community and doing talks and stuff, and thanks to people like Mark who've given me opportunities to do stuff like this as well. And it's a really, you know, the impact has been really great because I've been able to learn so much from other people about how they're using these kind of data tools and technologies. The examples I put together for being able to do stuff like this helps me grow personally and technically in a lot of this environment. So you know, that's kind of where I'm coming from, and what I wanted to go through today is actually how I've gone through some of that journey. You know, starting to build reporting using predominantly Power BI, and then you know where I've gone on that journey. So first thing is kind of why tell stories. And when I started off building Power BI reports kind of a few years ago, and I was quite new to the world of data visualization. I'd go in and I'd speak to clients and I'd say, right, what do you want to see on your report? And they'd point me to their traditional Excel reports and say, can you reproduce some of this in the Power BI? I'd be like, yeah. And I'd go through and I'd get some very specific detail on what they want to see. And then I'd build these reports and I'd be like, right, I've given them exactly what they want, but actually I've given them that extra flexibility, that extra cross-filtering and highlighting that you can get from something like an interactive data visualization tool. And what I kind of realized actually is that those reports never really got that business engagement and adoption. And I was really perplexed by this for quite some time, because I'm like, well, actually, why not? I've given them exactly what they want. Maybe I need to be more specific on finding out what they need. So I started building more and more detail around capturing exactly what it is they want to see. And then I kind of came across this idea about storytelling with data. And it kind of then dawned on me that actually I was doing that a bit wrong. You don't need to go and ask people what they want to see, because you ask 10 different people, you'll get 10 different opinions of what they want to see. And it also then depends on actually what story you're trying to tell with it. And actually what they want to see isn't necessarily the story that you need to get across with your data. And what I've kind of found is that actually by taking a step back and actually not focusing on the graphs or anything at this point, but actually starting just to think about what are the questions that you really want to answer. What is, as Mark was showing, you can answer loads of different questions with visualizations. And actually the right visuals to show, the right use of color, the right use of titles, all of that depends on what you're trying to get across. There isn't actually a right answer necessarily. It depends on what you're trying to show. Are you trying to show distribution? Are you trying to show actually where those cities are located in the UK? Because actually what you show depends on which graph you pick, for example, shows quite different things. So the real way to actually identify what you need to show actually is to step away from that, to actually step away from all of the data and the visualization to say, right, what are we actually trying to do? What is the message we want to get across? And what is a story we want to tell with data? And stories are, very, very powerful. I'm not going to go into all of this stuff, but I mean, it's, there's lots of stuff out there around why storytelling is powerful, right? People remember stories. People make decisions based on emotion, based on, that kind of left brain thinking, which is actually very much driven by stories. And it's all these things around kind of neural coupling, and there's lots of things. I mean, Mark was showing some statistics before as well about how this stuff impacts our brains. And actually, there's this whole idea that actually as long as we can tell a story, then we can gain that business engagement. And what do we mean by storytelling? So what do we mean by a story? So a story has, for a start, it has a structure, has a beginning, has a middle, and an end. And it also has this idea of tension, this idea that actually you're building up to something, so there's something that's wrong, or something that is a tense situation that you seek to resolve. And every movie you can think of kind of has this idea of this tension, right? Every storybook has this idea of building up through this thing, and it's exactly the same thing with data visualization. So to really tell an effective story, we need to find what that tension is, and it could be actually that sales aren't good enough, or we've had a massive drop in sales, we've lost 30% of our customers, we're not getting new customers as well as we should have been. Whatever that tension is, and then you use the data to tell a story through that, to identify that tension, identify the root causes behind it, and then work out what we can do. And that's really the end of it, is that if we miss that end bit, that's so what? We need to try to get to that to say, well, what can we do about it? What is the action that we can take at the back of this? So, in my mind, there's 3 types of stories that you can do with kind of data visualization. And I've kind of align this as an analogy to how you do anything, right, when you go through school. I think you start with your own notes, your own exploration, and this is what most people do. The audience predominantly for that is you, and you start off and you get some data in, and you play around with it, you put some graphs in, and you find patterns, you find areas of interest, and you create these kind of scratch pads. What a lot of people then do is make those look pretty and hand them off as the end result. And actually that's, again, that's the kind of thing I did a lot before as well. You get some patterns, you think, okay, this is interesting, and then you get some graphs to work well together, make it look pretty, and here you go, you've got a data visualization. But to really get the storytelling, we need to then guide the users through that journey. And I think there's 2 ways we can do that. One is the kind of exploratory analysis. So what we need to be able to, and one is the children's storybook. So the exploratory analysis is actually just structuring your arguments. So, you still have these cross-filterings. You're not necessarily giving them all the answers up front, but you're guiding them through that journey. You're giving them points that are interesting, and you're making arguments with your data. With the children's storybook, and this is the kind of execs audience, you just literally, it's kind of like Mark's example, you say, you put the UK in red line and everything else in grey and say UK is growing fast because you're making your point. And that's what you need to do at that level, because actually they're not going to have the time or inclination to cross-filter and explain the increase and decrease and do that kind of analysis. So it does very much depend on your audience. And actually this essay type that I'm saying, so an essay is structured. If you ever look at a grid, an exam grid for how exam essays are evaluated, it's always following a structure. It's always they want you to make a point, explain it, and evaluate it, and then complete all of that, and then get to a conclusion at the end. And that's exactly what I think we need to do with data visualization. And I'm going to use the same example that Mark showed with the baby names, and I'm going to take that data set and show all 3 of these kind of through that same lens. I'll go through some of this first, because I think then it will make a bit more sense. So scratch pads is kind of understanding your data. Looking again, you kind of pull out some names here, look at the trends, look at some patterns that you might find interesting. Your guided exploration is then where you start to put together arguments. And the way you need to do this is really think about what those arguments are. When I say arguments, what I mean is you've got a statement. You can say sales was down 20% last month, sales was £200 last month. Right, that might be a statement. Is that good or is that bad? Right. So in order to turn that statement into an argument, you need to provide it some context. So we need to say, well, actually, what was it the month before? Or what percentage growth does that represent? Is that in line with what we'd expect given our marketing efforts? Is that in line with what we'd expect given the time of year if that's a seasonal business? So we need to be able to provide that kind of context. And for me, that's the difference between a statement and an argument. And there's lots of good graphs and choices of visuals and ways that we can provide context to our numbers. We also then need to think about things like how do we want those interactions to work? How do we want that cross-highlighting to do? And we also then think about the measures that we choose. So rather than just having lots of simple measures that we'd be used to, kind of calculated row by row in Excel like we would in Excel, we think about some of those ratios, some of those key points that we can bring out, and we just use those measures. So we don't need to show all the detail necessarily, right? We have budget and actuals, but if all we're interested in is the variance, let's just calculate the variance and show that variance by the various categories that we're looking at. As an example, I mean, it might be relevant to show both, but maybe we start high level, just show the variance because that's what we're really interested in, and then allow people to drill into the detail. Allow people to say, okay, the variance is really high in this particular region. Let's drill into that. Is it because we set the targets too high, or is it actually that they performed poorly? And then we can start to look into those details. Explanatory story is much more around the annotations, and there's a feature in Power BI called Bookmarks, which allow you to take snapshots of your data with particular filters applied, and you can choose the colors are much more easy. So with this, then you're starting again. With the exploratory analysis, it's easy enough to do. When the data's changing every day and people are analysing it, and it's kind of operational reports. This kind of explanatory story is what you then present back up, and how you necessarily present those reports. And this is what people traditionally have done by, you do your exploratory analysis in Excel, then you take some charts and put them into PowerPoint and send them back up to the board. And then they ask you for a different cut, so you come back and do the same thing again for 2 weeks, and you spend the rest of your life doing that. This is then where, alternative to that, where you can actually use the same medium, use the same types of graphs, but actually put some more context around it. This is where the human element really comes into it. You don't need interactivity with this. You've got it, it's possible, you can still interact with it, but actually it's more about you guiding the exact story on that. And I think people feel a bit nervous about that because you're like, well, should I really be saying the story as well? Probably. And this is the thing, we need to probably move a little bit away from actually just presenting the data to actually saying, we've done the analysis, we've done the hard work of identifying what the data's telling us. So we need to communicate that to people. So I'll go through kind of how, because I want to really focus on this essay bit, on this exploratory analysis, because I think that's probably the hardest, I think, to almost get right. Because, just rather than going from the kind of finding something interesting to actually guiding people through that journey. The key to this, in my mind, is knowing your audience. Because actually there's lots and lots of different guidance explorations you can do. There's lots of different stories you can tell. The stories that are going to be most relevant depends on exactly who that audience is. So, and the key thing to do with that is to ask questions. So, Mark was showing earlier about bike hire, right? So this was an example I put together for the questions that you might ask around that bike hire. It was a very simple data set. It was just dates, number of bikes. But actually what we're looking at is we're saying, well, who is the user audience? You've got to have someone specific. So I've said here, actually, it's the bike hire sponsor looking, someone like Santander or Barclays looking to sponsor the bikes. So then they've got a particular commercial incentive because they want to know how many people are using these bikes. They want to see how it's being used. So they want to say, well, how many bikes have been hired over time? Are there particular periods where there have been spikes and dips? And actually, maybe they're not so interested in the tube strikes because, for them it's a longer term game. It's not necessarily about those outliers. How seasonal is that bike usage? How does it vary by month and by day of week? So you're trying to then really pick out what it is they're interested in. And the questions to these are the things that they can then do something about, or they can do something about, like make that decision. And actually, am I gonna, is it worth us doing it? Is it just a seasonal thing? Is it actually just in summer everyone gets some bikes, but in winter no one really sees them anyway, so we don't get that kind of publicity. And then maybe actually, what is the most common groups of bike hire? Is it, there's going to be a range. You're going to have ups and downs, but maybe let's start to categorize that, because actually, what's our most frequent bin is what I was saying here in terms of number of bike hires per day. And you can look at growth and things like that. So there's lots of different measures we could come up with, even with that 2-column data set. Right? You can start to look at growth over time. You can start to look at the bikes, the regions that have the highest growth and the lowest growth. And these are the types of analyses actually you couldn't really do in Excel, because all you've got in Excel is that kind of row-by-row analysis. Whereas here we can build things in Power BI called measures, which sit at the layer above that calculations. So, we start actually kind of very blue sky around, what would you really like to know? And the chances are you'll be able to build something like that in Power BI. And then it's about picking those arguments. So saying, okay, get that mix between statements, which is just making a point, and arguments. So is the context, give the evaluation. And think about the order in which you present them. The next thing, once you've kind of done that, is then you actually need to plan your layout. You need to storyboard your analysis. So a really good way of doing that is actually to get post-it notes and just kind of brainstorm. Right, what kind of things would you want to show? So maybe we can show bike highs over time. Maybe we can show binned histograms that show the number of highs in a particular time period. And then just jot them all down, and then just think about how to lay them out. And use a grid layout. So your layout is actually really important. And as you were saying here, you could use PowerPoint to create a grid, to create a background. So what you do is you go into PowerPoint, just create some boxes and some shapes, save that as an image, and use that image as your background in Power BI. You've got then space for your visuals. They're all aligned because they're in boxes that you align in PowerPoint. They're all, you've got space for your charts. You can make sure you've got white space around it, which is quite important. Don't have too many visuals on a page. Have lots of white space. Have just a minimum number of visuals you need in order to present the argument. Less is definitely more. And I'm not going to go too huge about this because Mark covered a lot of this in his, in terms of kind of choosing the visuals. But I've highlighted a couple here that are some of my key go-to visuals for providing that context. Cards are really, really good because actually they give you a metric. And actually that's a really good way to present your arguments initially. At the top of your page, just have your key metrics, but have indicators if you can. Have up and down arrows to say, has it gone up or gone down? So you have something to highlight the change. Bullet charts, if you guys have seen these, I was going to put together some examples. I'll try to put some later, but you've got a chart with a kind of line that shows against target. So how far are you from target? Waterfalls, we'll see some of those where you can see increases and decreases. What's contributed to a change? So you've started with one number, you've ended up with another. What's been the driving factors between that? Could be month, like you could show it over time almost as well, but you could be particular categories have driven that change. Scatter plots are great because, as Mark was showing, you've got one providing the context for the other. So you've got two measures, and then you're seeing one measure in the context of the other measure. So that's a really good way to do it. And then table or matrix, again, looking like a Mark example, like that conditional formatting, or there's data bars or spike lines to provide that additional context. Guiding attention. So I'll go through these so quickly. I'll just come back and kind of really share some examples. But just again, some key ideas around this. Simplify. So don't, rather than showing big numbers, try and use number formats that are easy to read. So 1.2 million rather than, the 12003. Remove grid lines from charts. So make those charts as simple as possible. Think with data labels, for example. Sometimes they could look really, really messy because you've got lots of data labels. One of the things they've done in Power BI now is you can choose the label density. So you can actually reduce that down so it shows fewer points, or you can choose to show more points. Generally, actually, if you've got an axis, you don't need data labels because what you're really trying to show then is the trend. You're not interested in the individual position points. If you're interested in individual position points, then have data labels, but then you don't need an axis because no one's going to read across. So it depends on what you're trying to show. And try and keep a clean design. So, it's good to have backgrounds and things like that, but actually, sometimes they distract from the visuals themselves and from the story you're trying to tell. So let it speak for itself. Provide context. I kind of said it's quite a lot already, but get the measures. consider using report tooltips to provide that additional context. So again, you've got these interactive elements that you can take advantage of. When someone hovers over something, that can show them a bit of context with that as well. And make sure you're truthful with how you represent the data. So with bar charts, they should always start from 0 rather than a later point, just because of the way we visualize that. Color. Use color really sparingly. So actually I see a lot of rainbow visualizations where you've got 12, 13 categories all with a different color. And this is something that's quite hard to do, because if you are trying to show lots of categories, then it will always color them differently. You do have control over which colors you use. And again, especially when you're doing that kind of explanatory analysis, that kind of children's storybook, then make sure you use color to really guide attention, or actually use high contrast colors. Like in Mark's example, show the reds versus the grays. Gray out everything else and pick the stuff that you want to highlight with high contrast. But do remember that certain colors have connotations, so red bad, green good. And also bear in mind that there's a high enough proportion of people who are colorblind. So actually colors like red and green aren't particularly good to use anyway, which makes it quite difficult. Then you start to get into quite a narrow set of colors. And sometimes you are quite constrained with colors. But things like blues work really well against grays, as an example. Think about cross-filtering, think about drilling. So again, think about this interactive element as well. How the charts interact. You can start with a high level and drill down into a lower level of detail. So what you can have, say in PowerBI, is you can have drill-through pages for a particular dimension. So, for example, I have a particular name, and then you can look at the trends of that name. So you can look at trends and names and then say, okay, let me look at this in a bit more detail and drill through to a report page. That's something that's quite good. And then where you've got a hierarchy, so it might be year, month, day, it might be country, city, address, you can start again at a high level and have a drill down functionality to be able to allow the users to drill down into those. And this one I'm going to come back to, because there's some AI stuff that's quite cool as well that allows you to actually, and this is where Microsoft are really going with something like Power BI, is actually building some of that technology in there to allow the system to actually tell you where some of those insights are. And recognizing that you're presenting a particular point, but if you're doing an exploratory analysis, then maybe you actually want to ask different questions to the ones that were initially asked. So let's look at this baby names example. This doesn't actually work with this, does it? Sorry, I tried to use different desktops. There you go. Right. So this baby names example, let's have a look at our data set. So we've got a table for boys' names. So we've got year, name, boy name, rank, and then ranking. So what Mark's done here is just put -1 on each one, because actually you want 1 to be the highest. And when you're showing it in a chart, you want it to go up rather than going down being good. And we've got the same thing for girls. So we've got year, girl name, rank, and then just the inverse of that when you want to plot it against a measure. So we start with kind of our scratchpad analysis. So we start with, we put a few names together, and this is kind of what Mark was showing before. So we have a few names, and we can say, right, let's pick a couple of names and let's show those trends over time. If we remove this, and we'd end up with a bit of a mess. we probably want to start with something, or we want to give people the ability to at least filter down into names that interest them. So the filter pane is quite a good way to do that. You could also have a slicer. But even just looking at this, you can start to kind of see which ones look a bit interesting. Here you're seeing the ones that have actually got some really high popularity, and ones that have come in and out of fame. But we could start to, even with this kind of simple data set, we could then start to think about actually what was interesting here. What are the ones we really want to show? Where do we want to show? What do we want to highlight? And again, it kind of comes back to, well, who's your audience for this? How do you go from this to insights? And there's quite a few potential audiences for this, as Mark was saying, right? Sociologists or parents looking to name their babies. They might look to see which names are most popular. I've taken a slightly different tack because actually I've thought about actually who else might be interested in this and what else would they particularly be interested in. And what I've picked is then manufacturers of personalised baby goods, right? Because people, when you go and buy stuff I actually do buy personalised goods a bit, and you can go on the internet and order something and it takes a few weeks and you don't actually really know what you're getting. But if you go to a shop, you've only got the names they've got there. So the people who create these goods have to know which names are going to be most popular because they need to know which names to create the goods for. So they need to know which ones are also gaining and losing in rank. So they need to kind of keep up with those trends. I came up here with a few questions around, we haven't got a huge number of measures, a very, very simple data set, but there's a lot of questions we can answer with that. In terms of, which names have seen that biggest increase or decrease now, or, in the past? What does that trend look like? What are the top names? What are the top names now? What are the top names at the time in the past? And then actually, I've made up some sales data to put in here, because actually, that's quite important as well, because it really comes back to that, so what? What's our effect going to be on sales? Is there actually a correlation between the rank and how well that product performs? We look at kind of total sales and units sold. And a lot of this then is actually thinking about what data sets, because as you say, if we did this for a different audience, that sales data would not have been relevant. But now that we've identified that audience, we say actually we need to provide context for this. We need to be able to answer the so what about the ranks, because we actually need to relate it to our business. So let's bring in our sales data and then correlate the two. And that's why it's important to do this exercise before you do everything, before you just go and start building all your visualizations. Then you come onto the kind of wireframes. And here, then, you can do this in balsamic mockups or in Word, like I did, just kind of 10 minutes. It's basically then saying, okay, well, how do you present this as arguments, right? So we want to compare. We want to compare 2 points in time. So let's just split the page in half. Let's do time year X, and let's do year X plus T. And then let's see the movement between them. Let's see the top names in each year. And see, are they the same names, or are they different? For those names, how have they become more popular or less popular? What's been the change? And then we start to actually then really focus on this kind of decline and growth, and start to look at those names that are declining. So we want to start potentially phasing those out of our products, and those names that are gaining in popularity. Even if they're not really popular now, actually maybe they're becoming more popular. And if they're on the rise, we want to get ahead of the curve and start creating some products for Archie, because we know Archie's going to be really popular now in the next few years. That kind of thing. Actually doesn't show, because beta is old, isn't it? Otherwise it probably would show Archie on there, wouldn't it? That's one of the names. This is again kind of, you could do this kind of thing with post-it notes, right? You present these kind of things and then you say, right, let's think about how we want this page to look. How do we want to guide attention? We want people to be able to compare. Let's put some graphs here, let's show this over time, let's show the top names, and then let's show them in there. And this is kind of then what I came up with that kind of example. So what we've got here is we've got, at the top we can choose our timelines. So we can choose a start year and an end year, and look at whether we want to look at boys or girls. And then we've got that kind of split in the page. So now we're looking at the most popular names in 1964 versus 2017. And we can see the top 5 names in 1964 and then the trends of those, and the top 5 in 2017 and the trends in those. And what we can see is actually there's a clear marked difference between the names that were popular in 1964 are no longer popular. They've just all fallen off a cliff. And all the names that are popular now pretty much have just come from very humble beginnings, and they've climbed to popularity, rather than names always been popular through the years. So we can see actually we start with some kind of headlines, right? So we start with those two things to say, right, the most popular boy's name was David, and in 2017 that went down from rank 1 to rank 44. And in 2017 the most popular boy's name was Oliver, and in 1964 that wasn't even on the list of the top 100. That was, God knows, it was probably 200 or something like that. So just looking at those graphs, you get the real information. And we can actually, because this is exploratory analysis, we want to give users the flexibility to actually say, well, hang on, let's see if I'm not that interested in 1960s, to be fair. We didn't have a business and then we started our business in the mid-1990s. Let's see how those names are fared. And now we can start to pick any year and start to see kind of that trend from that time. So now from 1998 all the way down, and it's still a similar story. I mean, actually here you can see quite a few years of fair stability, and then it goes down. And then, as I say, we're providing the report tooltips. So the tooltips that came out of the box with this, they were a bit messy because they had rank key, that's a negative number, and then they had rank, and it started, and you hover over, you're thinking, okay, I don't really know what I'm looking at here. So you just create a report tooltip page, and now you can start to see for each year as you hover over. That obviously shows the same as the beginning graph, but then you can see how that changes. So now you see Daniel's gone from rank 4 to rank 32. And then James has gone to 17, Joshua's gone to 15, Thomas to 13, and Jack to 5. So Jack's actually fared the best in those years, but there's clearly been some falls, going from rank 4 to rank 32 in that time frame. And then we've also then got that bottom bit where we've said, okay, well, how do we then really look at those names declining and those names growing? And you have to start to get it. The DAX behind this got a bit complex, right? So to really try and work out the average annual growth. So to pick 2 points in time and then work out the average and do all of this. And this took me a little while, but it was worth the investment, because actually what we're really doing then is getting that insight. So now what we're saying is, here again, we've made it a bit flexible. We can say, do we want to look back 5 years or 10 years and look at the growth in those? Like from now, between now, what are the names that have had the most decline between a given point in time? So between, last 5 years, last 10 years. And then we can see those names. And what's really interesting is actually when you start to compare these two, because you see the top names, back in 1998 are pretty much almost identical to the same list of names that have had the highest decline. And the reverse is very true for here. In fact, it's identical here, where you say the top 5 names now are also those with the highest growth. So all those names that are popular now are the ones that have been growing most in the last 5 years. And we've got then, we've got the names in most decline. And with all of these, actually, again, I've put another report tooltip so you can start to just see the rank. So it's a simple table, so you can start to see actual numbers rather than, this is showing you a trend, right? We haven't got data labels on there intentionally because it would be too messy, but we're just showing the trends. That's what's important. But then when you actually want to focus on a specific name, that's when actually you can start to see the exact numbers. You can start to see the exact ranks, and then color-coded them. Actually, that should be the reverse color coding. There, rank 2 is good. But you see the idea behind that. So names with highest decline, and then we've got kind of a slope graph. And actually, this is just a line graph. I've just pulled out 2 points and made it a slope graph. But I took inspiration from the ONS site. I thought that worked quite well, because actually what you're showing is between 2 points. So a slope graph is actually a really good way to just show that increase or decrease just between those 2 points. Works really well for showing where we were in 2012, where we were in 2017. And then the same thing for gaining in popularity. So names for the high growth, and then we've got the year's growth. So if we just take this page now, we've got a huge amount of information here. We've got a huge amount of directions we can go in, but it's all very guided, because we're still making arguments. We're still saying, here's your top names. Here's how they've performed. Here's the ones that have performed the worst. Here's the ones that have grown the most or declined the most. So we're still presenting those kind of arguments, but we're still giving users the flexibility to really drive those insights. Time. And then, again, I kind of took inspiration from the kind of ONS site around, yes, this is all really messy, but actually, what if we want to focus not on those 5 names, but now we want to have a bit more exploratory analysis. We want to pick some names we want to compare. So, we can pick. So here we can then start typing in some names. So again, if we compare Mark, who else did we have? What other names did we have? Matthew, Martin. You seem to be going for a lot of M's here. So Gareth, yeah. Do you know, I'm going to pick a non-English name. Mohammed. That was one that I saw come up actually. It was becoming quite popular. Anything else? So? James. Yeah, James. James is a good one. So now we've picked a few names, and we can see then again we've got the kind of table here. So now again the table's really good for showing that position. And we use the colour to really drive attention and drive what's good and what's bad. So you can kind of see ranks going up and down. And we don't have data points for every year. I thought we did have more for Mark actually, I'm not sure. Well, it's not coming up anyway. And then the idea is that we can see how those are performed for those specific names. So this allows us to do that kind of guided analytics. And then we can kind of see them bar charts. I put this in here. I mean, I probably wouldn't put this in a corporate presentation because animations don't generally run too well, but it's the kind of thing where actually you can start to see things, how the orders are moving around. And if you've only got a couple, actually that works quite well because you can start to see things shifting. Like the Han Rosling type story about how things are changing over time. I didn't go as far as choosing the fish tank visual. So again, it's kind of then you're thinking about the purpose of this, and that was one of the things we had on there, which was actually, where do we want to know how our current baby names have been performing. So actually, what we'd put in here is what names do we currently producing products for. Let's see how they're doing, and let's see what the rank of those particular ones have been. So not just the top ones or the bottom ones, but the ones that we actually have baby products for. And then, as I say, what you really need to do is then show the so what. So, okay, this is interesting. We can see that actually there are clear trends in baby names, but actually, how is that? What does our performance of sales of baby products look like in relative to that? Because actually, that's what they're really going to be interested in. And so, now we start to say, okay, well, let's look at sales, and let's see the pattern of our sales, and let's look at actually the correlation of that and rank. And that's where scatter plots really come in handy, because now you can start to see, actually, do the ones that have a lower rank actually perform? Do we sell less of those products? And this is made up data, so yes, obviously, it does. But, we see the idea here that actually our sales are declining. And these are 5 product names we've got, number of units is going down. And then we've got rank and total sales, and then just plotted rank along the one axis and total sales against the other. And we can see the kind of pattern between those. As the rank goes down, our sales volumes also go down. So each of these is a year, and it's coloured by name. So actually we can show quite a lot of dimensions on here. We're showing both measures. We're showing rank, we're showing sales, we're showing it by year, and we're showing it by name. So we can really kind of see that pattern. And then we can see all the blues are Daniel. We can focus on highlight some of those. James, Joshua, Thomas. So now we've really kind of got that exploratory story. We've really kind of pulled out those arguments, given a way for people to get the story on there. And we've got that tension. Now's when we come to the children's storybook. Right? So now we say, okay, now we want to present this to an exec. And the exec is not going to, he might be interested in some of this and be, okay, that's interesting. He's not really going to sit around and start to filter with the sliders and, start to see where names are getting more popular and less popular. He's just like, okay, look, what do we need to do? I've got 5 minutes. So what we have here is this idea of bookmarks. And what we can do with this is pick particular visualizations to show and put some narratives around there, put some text boxes and things. It starts to highlight some more information. So, and then once you put a few together, this is like PowerPoint for data basically. Once you put a few together, we click on view, and now we can start to tell a bit of the story with this. So now this is the kind of presentation mode, if you like, for Power BI. So we start off saying sales of our personalized baby goods has been in sharp decline because we have not kept up with trends in baby names. Now that's quite bold, and you probably wouldn't start that, but because we've done that exploratory analysis, because we've actually really shown the context, we've got to our story through that exploratory analysis, we can make bold statements like that, and we should, because we've got the data to support that now. And then we say, okay, the boys' names that we currently create products for has been declining. So we've got the same visual, but we filtered for the 5 names that, okay, maybe I haven't done it here, but yeah, so in these ones we filtered for the 5 names that we have baby name products for. So we can see those declining in rank over time. So we can see them all starting off in 2000. Clearly we did this exercise in 2000 because we picked the 5 most popular names then, but we haven't bothered since then to look at whether they've become more or less popular. So we haven't updated our product names since then. And they've been declining since 2000, as we can see the kind of rank. They were in the top 5 for the first few years, and then they all just kind of fell off. But then we've got a bit of text, a bit of annotation to really highlight it. So we're using exactly the same visuals, but we're highlighting it. But then we're saying, what does this graph show you? Well, it shows you there's a clear correlation between rank and sales. As the popularity of the names we create products for has dropped, so has the sales of these products. So we're really driving that, we're making that point very, very clear using those visuals. And then we're also looking at some of those growth ones. So we're saying the top 5 names have also been the ones with the highest growth, and these are the names we should focus on. So now we have something to really take away. We have some action coming out of this. So our story, we had that tension. We started with that, our sales have dropped. We haven't been keeping up with baby name trends. We've then looked to kind of resolve that tension. As we say, right, built it up. And then we come to that resolution. So we've got like a typical movie story plot line. We've got the happy ending at the end where we say, now here's the names we should focus on. This is what we need to do. And then we could even do a little forecast if we wanted to say if we switched our baby names to this is what our sales would now look like. I didn't get as far as that, but yeah, you get the idea. So any questions on that? Does that kind of make sense on those different types of stories? Cool. Okay. The next example I wanted to show was a different one around employee churn. So let's just see what. So what this is showing. So our data set here is looking at we've got for each level, for all these given employees or given groups of employees, we've got factors that might determine how likely they could possibly be to, that would have an impact on them possibly working. So things like, have they had an accident at work? Yes or no? Have they been promoted in the last 5 years? How many projects have they done? What's their average monthly hours? And then what we've done is then scored that probability and said how likely are they to leave. So obviously we fed in a whole load of data of people who've left and all the attributes, so how many hours they worked when they left, and all the people who's still here and how many hours they work and had they been promoted. And then from there we can actually do some quite clever stuff in the background to be able to then turn this around. So again, what I want to show here is actually you can still use a lot of the same principles around telling the story, but now we can be really clever about actually predictive analytics and doing some things that are actually picking out those key drivers, those key influencers. So if we start with, say, monthly hours worked, what we've got here then is average monthly hours worked and the probability of employees leaving. And what we can see is a real kind of trend, and actually, if people work too little, they're quite likely to leave because they're not doing much, I guess. Not fulfilling their human purpose, whatever. And then, there's a kind of sweet spot here where, people are working, between 100, that's quite a lot actually, isn't it? Oh, monthly hours, okay, yeah. So it's not too bad, I guess. Somewhere to 150. Once you start getting above 200, your probability goes up massively. So we can see actually that's something that just by looking at that graph, we can see that it has quite a high impact, has quite a high impact on people leaving. And then we've got that by the bins and also by salary, so high, medium or low salary. And actually we can see it's a fairly similar story regardless of salary. So even if you're paid loads, you still don't want to work long hours. It's basically the gist of that. Although actually if you're paid a bit more, your threshold for longer hours is slightly better. Which kind of makes sense. And then we've got this broken down by kind of, what is the scored probability by department. And we can start to cross-filter. So we can then see, actually, let's pick a particular department, and let's see how they do. And again, this is quite good for that exploratory analysis. We're still presenting arguments, we're still saying, here's the impact of hours, but we're giving people the breakdown. So similar to the kind of baby names. We've then got, say, something around what-if analysis. So here's where we could then do a bit of kind of modeling in Power BI, where we say, okay, let's pick a department, whether they've had a promotion. So we're looking at a particular employee. Say you're sitting with someone in their one-to-one, and before you go into the meeting, you want to say, right, this person's on a low salary, they work in accounting, they haven't been promoted in 5 years. What do we think the chances are of them leaving? And then we can say, well, actually, we know work hours is a big thing. Let's see, the moment they work in 160 hours and they're pretty likely to leave. They've got a 50% chance. Let's drag that down to 140. Oh, okay. There you go. Now they're much less likely to leave. So, this is not real data, by the way, before you... but you get the idea. So actually, now we're starting to do a bit of modeling. We're starting to really get insights into that data and help it for us to drive decisions. This is very different to that baby names example because we're doing a lot more to that data before. We're training a model, an AI model, and we're able to do that. We've also got a couple of things here where we can say, okay, so now we're looking at salary. And we're looking at high, medium, low, and how likely will they stay or leave depending on their satisfaction level. So we can see this is accidents at work, right? So we can see how many accidents at work against particular salaries. So say we can see here we've got a massive jump. And then we can say, well, actually, what's contributed to that jump? And actually, we haven't answered that particular question here because we've just drawn the graph. And this could be a particular challenge because actually you don't necessarily know when you're building the report what's going to be the most important things to consider. So what Microsoft have built in is kind of functionality to allow those end users to be able to get more insights than are just presented to them. So they could kind of say right-click and say analyze and say explain that increase. What that will do, so here's analysis of that 4.25% increase in number of accidents. This just tells you how it works. And now we can start to see actually it went from 635 to 662, and most of those came from these departments, so technical, sales, product, manufacturing. And actually marketing and support, their number of accidents actually went down. So it's not, an even story. So now we can start to really kind of understand what's driving that increase. And if we like these, we can actually add them to our report. And there's lots more functionality coming around this kind of thing, where actually people can start to build their own bookmarks and build their own, which people do now, and start to build your own stories. And this is one of the things. And actually, arguably, the people who are best placed to build those stories are the people who are consuming these reports. So I think that was quite interesting. One of the best ones actually that we've had. So I'll show you two of my favourite things with these. One is around so one is around Q&A. And it's a similar kind of idea. And traditionally this has always been only in Power BI service, in dashboards, but now it's in reports as well. And again, the idea behind this is actually people who are consuming this, you've answered a particular set of questions that you thought of, and it's important to get those questions right, which is why we do those scoping exercises, but it might not be all the questions that people have when they're looking at it. So what you want to give them the ability to do is actually ask their own questions. And what they don't want to have to do, and probably are not able to do, is download that data and do their own analysis, write those DAX measures and build their own visualizations. So what this allows you to do is ask a question in natural language English, and it will give you a visual. So your data needs to be structured in the right way, and you can do things like give it synonyms. So you can say, I've called it this, but it could also be called, revenue could also be called turnover, or it could be called, then you get employee turnover. So English is a strange language to do this on, I guess. Okay, these are probably not. So satisfaction level by department. So you can see it's starting to build up starting to understand what I want by department. Oh, maybe department was the wrong one. Over time. Okay, so that's quite works. But you need to know what the kind of questions are. You need to have the kind of right data model. But you can see the idea actually. As you start to type a question in, it will start to give you visuals that will answer those. And you can see actually how many promotions were there in the last 5 years. What are the top data sets by company, and then you can start to see, it will give you the visuals to do that. You can also actually say, ask pie chart or something, and it will give it to you as a pie chart. So like, this is actually a way for you to create visuals if you don't know how to create it in Power BI. I don't use this particularly often. I started using Power BI long before this came in, so I'm probably more used to that way. But this is the way you can actually build visuals even in Power BI Desktop in the report. But the idea for this is around end users. Last thing I want to show on this actually, key influencers. So this has been something that's been recently introduced, and it's been actually one of the best kind of drivers, one of the AI things that Microsoft have brought into Power BI. And the idea behind this is what you could do is put in a measure, or what influences left a company to be yes. So what's the most people? What are the drivers that influence people to leave? And this could be a measure, so it could be a category: high, medium, low, yes, no. So something that you've kind of binary classification, if you like. And then you put in all the things that you think potentially impact it. So salary, satisfaction level, number of hours worked, all of these potential drivers. And this is the heart of kind of machine learning, right? It's basically linear regression. What this is doing is runs all that linear regression for you in the background without you knowing it, and just gives you a chart that tells you what variable factors are. So we say, what influences people to leave the company? So we just put in left company as what you want to analyze, and then all the factors you want to analyze it by. And you say, well, actually, people who have a satisfaction level of 11% or less are 5.26 times more likely to leave. Okay, fine. If the satisfaction level is between 35% and 46%, they're still, up to 5 times likely more to leave. Average monthly hours is more than 287. So you can see the power of these kind of insights, and to get to this through doing all of your analysis and doing the right charts and then the storyboarding, you'd have to do a lot of work to get to this. So especially for certain examples, this kind of stuff works really well. So actually incidentally, number of work accidents is 0. People are more likely to leave. So actually people don't leave when they've had accidents, they leave when they haven't had accidents, which is quite interesting. So people leave when they have had accidents. So, yeah. Okay, so time spent at company is more than 6. So if there's company to be no. So actually people who've stayed there longer already are less likely to leave. So again, it's really, really kind of powerful insights. Let's pop back to the slides. So, yeah, I'll just quick recap for some of these as well, because I think they're quite important, right? So guided attention. This is the whole thing around telling the story. So again, we want to minimize clutter. So we saw some examples of that. Providing context. Using color carefully. Cross-filtering and drilling. So giving people that ability to start at a high level, present those arguments, and drill down into detail. And then here's let the technology work for you. So try and look at how you can use some of these features. So things like forecasting, having training tools, using the key influences, or using explain the increase or decrease. Right. Have you got any questions? So I'll show you one other thing as well, a good resource to kind of have a look at some visualizations. So data stories gallery. This has got examples that people have published through the community and stuff. Internet's a bit slow on this. Any questions on storytelling before we? Yep. Key influences, yeah. I think it's essentially it's drivers, right? You're showing drivers, so you put in something you want to analyze, and then all the potential things that could impact that, and it will give you all of those that are important and by how much. So I guess I don't know exactly what's behind it, but I mean it sounds like some kind of linear regression model. It's obviously what you can do as well. So with PowerBI, what they've brought out is data flows. So in AI and data flows, so you can actually train your model inside the service and run pre-built models. Obviously, you can deploy your own machine learning models as well. So there's that. You've got different paths to go down. If you've got a data science team and you want to build your own models, absolutely. If you don't, but you still want to take advantage of those, you can use pre-built models and apply them to your own scenario. And this is a bit more down that path. Any other questions? So, I mean, just the way I showed, really. So, key influence is just a standard visual now in there. So, it's just the key influence visual. If you've got an old version of Power BI Desktop, it might be a preview feature, but I'm pretty sure it's GA now. And then explain the increase and decrease is there out of the box. So, you just right-click on the data point, and it will be there. What else is there? Natural language. Forecasting is on a line chart, and things like this. You've got there forecast on this particular bar here. You can then draw forecast lines. Again, that's simple models. Obviously, if you want to do more serious stuff, you can deploy models and do that now. So just very quickly then, I'll show you. This is FT visual vocabulary. This is a really good way to look at what charts to use. So it shows you for each type of thing you want to show. So when you want to show deviation, it shows you some examples of charts and kind of which ones, examples of which ones you could use. Scatter plot, line and column, correlation, bubble, XY heat map. Really, really good resource. One of my favorite visuals, and I don't know why, it's just I like the color and stuff like this as well. Is there no search on this? This was built by one of the guys in the product team, who happens to be a Brit. So this was something built for the Garden competition. But one thing I really like with this is the use of color. Like, it's using grey as your kind of base color almost, and then bringing out data points with blue and red for contrast. Again, showing that kind of where you need to guide your attention. Just very simple and neat. I started to put together a few other kind of resources. These are some of the things that I've used. So I went on her course recently, Cole Nussbaum and Affleck, which does something called storytelling with data. If any of you, if you had her on LinkedIn, I wrote an article last year about storytelling with data, actually based on listening to her book, which was quite nice, and a big book of dashboards. This is something, if you just Google Juice Analytics designing dashboards, people love to use. It's a short kind of 10-page PDF, but I think it brings out a lot of the key ideas on there as well around stuff. So I mean, there's loads of theory behind all this stuff, and it depends how far you want to get into it. But yeah, absolutely. So feel free to reach out to me if you start to go on this journey and you want to know some more. And I love talking about this kind of stuff. Cool. All right. Thanks a lot.